scripture is from Revelation chapter 4. It's from the message. Then I looked, and a door opened into heaven. The trumpet voice and the first voice in my vision called out, "Ascend and enter. I showed you what happened next." I was caught up at once in deep worship. And a throne set in heaven with one seated on the throne, suffused in gemstones of amber and flamed with a nimbus of emerald. 24 thrones circled the throne with 24 elders seated, bright robed, gold crowned. Lightning flash and thunder crash passed from the throne. 7 fire blazing torches front the throne. This saw the sevenfold Spirit of God. Before the throne, it was like a clear crystal sea. Running around the throne were 4 animals, all eyes. Eyes to look ahead, eyes to look behind. The first animal like a lion, the second like an ox, the third with a human face, the fourth like an eagle in flight. The 4 animals were winged, each with 6 wings. They were all eyes, seeing around and within. And they chanted night and day, never taking a break. Holy, holy, holy is God our Master, sovereign, strong, the was, the is, the coming. Every time the animal gave glory and honor and thanks to the one seated on the throne, the age after age living one, the 24 elders would fall prostrate before the one seated on the throne. They worshiped the age after age living one. They threw the crowns at the foot of the throne, chanting, "Worthy, O Master, yes, our God, take the glory, the honor, the power. You created it all. It was created because you wanted it." This is the word of God.
Thanks be to God. What a text. And today's scripture is all about the right answer is always Jesus. If you weren't trying to get it right, what would you say? The throne room? What's another way of talking about the throne room? What do we normally call that we just saw? Heaven. Yeah, absolutely. Heaven. So let's talk about heaven. What is heaven like? What's it look like? Do you remember? We're not going to put that text up again. What did we just hear Iris read? You have to do this by memory.
Precious
thrones, precious gems.
Nice.
It's nice.
It is very nice.
Nice is kind of just a little bit of an understatement for what we just read. But yeah, it's nice. Anything else you remember in heaven? What's heaven look like? Strange.
palace.
Rainbow.
Creatures.
There are these weird creatures.
6 wings.
6 wings and covered with
Eyes.
eyes. Where is heaven? Where is it? Didn't say in the text, by the way.
Where God is.
Where God is. That's a safe answer.
Sky.
We often point up, right? I remember as a child hearing this one pastor talk about how they have this really powerful Hubble telescope. Was it around yet? Maybe the Hubble wasn't quite going, but there was this powerful telescope, and they saw way in the distance a beautiful galaxy with colors beyond imagination. That must be heaven. It's not. Far, far away. High, high up. If it were way up there for us, then for the people in, India, they'd have to go like, heaven's there, wouldn't they? It's another dimension, you could say. Remember C.S. Lewis ward the Lion, the Witch, and the wardrobe. Through the wardrobe. Another dimension very near. God's space. Or maybe we could say the Lamb's space. George Caird puts it this way. Heaven is a part of the universe. It's a part of the universe, but a part which is entered by the opening of the spiritual eye rather than by any external form of transit. You don't get there by a spaceship, or even when we learn how to do it by teleporting. You can't get to heaven that way. It's like the fourth dimension. It's very near. We'll get there a little further. Who's there? Who's in heaven? God is there. Past saints, right? Where are all the dead people? We didn't read that in this chapter. We didn't see any of them. Where's my dad? By the way, the next scene of the great vision of Revelation, we will see the dead people. So hold on. Those who've died and gone through the door of death, we will see them, but they don't show up here in Genesis or in Revelation chapter 4. But they will show up in the next scene. By the way, Revelation, as you remember, is one great vision with a whole group of scenes to this one vision. We are now in scene 2. But it's actually only part 1. Next week we get to the whole point of scene 2. Chapter 4 and chapter 5 make up scene 2 of the 7 great scenes of the one vision that is Revelation that John has when he is... On what day of the week does he get this revelation, by the way?
Sunday.
On a Sunday morning, it seems, on an island out in the Mediterranean. How do you get there? How do you get to heaven? You die, right? I showed you this picture last Tuesday, right? Who is this? Dr. Strange is welcoming Stanley into the fourth dimension, I guess.
No, he's sending him there.
He's sending him to heaven, into the... Oh, right. He's not through yet.
Yes.
He's on this side of the great window into the great beyond, and so on. You heard the door, verse 1 of chapter 4. There's this doorway into heaven, but it doesn't say we go there by dying in chapter 4. What's another way we might get to heaven? Popularly, they say there's another way you can get to heaven, besides dying.
Believe in God.
Okay. You're not saying this because you know I don't believe in it. What is it that I don't believe in? That a lot of people think you can get to heaven by drugs. I don't believe in drugs either. Yeah. Some people say one day we're all going to get to fly off to heaven. What's that called? The rapture. Okay. It's not going to happen, but we'll talk about that a little later as well. What happens in heaven? Worship. Worship like we've never seen before. I mean, even Crave can't match that worship, right? And that actually is what Revelation 4 is really all about. Worship. Worship is heaven's preview, you could say. Actually, worship is heaven's reflection. When we worship, we get an image, we get a picture, we get a revelation or a reflection of what's happening right now in heaven. This is taking place right now. Look what happens next, said the angel, or said the trumpet voice of Jesus to John there in verse 2. Look at what's going on right now. Worship in heaven, we reflect it. Worship, you could say, is the Lamb's space. So we're going to finally meet the Lamb in part 2 of this scene. We haven't seen the Lamb yet, so this is a bit premature. The songs we sang today, Faith, a little premature, but we're getting there. So we're talking about the Lamb. I'm calling it Lamb space. What we really see today is God's space. Worship is then where heaven and earth touch, where they intersect. heaven and earth are kind of like two halves of an orange. They're overlapping, interlocking, not really like two halves of an orange because they intersect more fully than that. And that space between, that gauzy curtain in between God's space and our space, that's worship. Or, in the Old Testament, where they had a picture of the universe, what was a picture of the universe in the Old Testament? Do you remember? There's also a curtain there. Where do we see the curtain in the Old Testament? In the tabernacle and then in the temple. That's right. And that curtain is like where worship happens. It separates the holy space, our space, earth, from the Holy of Holies, which is a picture of God's space, Lamb space, heaven. And the Lamb, we know that, exists in both spaces, right? Remember after the resurrection, we would see the Lamb, we'd see Jesus kind of moving back and forth out of our dimension into God's dimension, out of God's dimension back into ours. Now you see him, now you don't. Right? Do you remember what happened in the temple when Jesus died on the cross? What happened? Yeah, the curtain is torn from heaven, from the top, down to earth. And not only is Jesus' body torn, and through him we come to God, the curtain opens up and we get to see right into God's space, right into the Holy of Holies. But that's next week, that we're going to get to meet the Lamb. This Sunday, the scene is the Lamb's space, but we don't see the Lamb yet. That thin space again. That gauzy curtain that's almost see-through when we worship. When the music team here led us in worship, we catch a glimpse into God's space. On earth, as it is in heaven, we pray. In worship, earth here images heaven. So we're doing down here for a little bit, for a short time, what's just going on continually and eternally in heaven all the time at this amazing capacity or dimension. Clearly, worship is enormously important then. If we are imaging heaven when we worship, worship has to be enormously important. So maybe it's no wonder that almost every church ever has struggles with worship. Most churches talk about their worship wars. Lots of people leave the church because they're just mad about worship. The music is too loud. The songs are too boring. The prayers don't connect with God. The singing is just so wooden, and all we sing is these old-fashioned hymns. I don't know any of the songs. What other things do we grumble about or do we have trouble with in worship, where we enter in and get close to God's space, to heaven? Anything else you heard? Or you said yourself?
No complaints.
Yeah, I know. No worship wars here. Chinatown peace. We're just about as close to heaven, second floor and all. Yeah. What if our worship could be this real reflection, this real image of what's going on in God's space and the Lamb's space? What if our worship here in this room could then open that door from verse 1 of our text, open the door right into heaven? Can John's vision of Revelation 4 help us to understand the importance, the meaning, the power of worship? I think it can. And there are three things. I think there's probably more, but there's three really clear things, I think, from the text that Iris just read that can help us to walk through the door, kind of come up to that gauzy curtain of heaven. First, and probably most obvious here, heaven's worship is, I'm going to say it, lavish. There, I said it. By the way, is that word still in currency, or is that word like so last month? Oh, it's still in currency. Okay, so I'll use it. Heaven's worship is awesome. Awful. Inspiring awe. Breathtaking, magnificent, crazy, lavish. How lavish? Well, even Crave, history maker, don't stand a chance. Let's look. I know, that's throwing down the gauntlet, but this is heaven. Okay. I was caught up at once in deep worship and oh. The old word, the usual word for that is, do you know? Behold. Behold is an old word, but it's kind of gone out of fashion. But behold had this idea of wow and look, kind of put together. Behold, a throne set in heaven, with one seated on the throne, suffused in gem hues of amber and flame with a nimbus of emerald. 24 thrones circle the throne, 24 elders seated, white robe, gold crowned. Lightning flash and thunder crash pulsed from the throne. 7 fire-blazing torches fronted the throne. These are the sevenfold Spirit of God, and so on. Oh, the sea of clear crystal glass. I mean, here on earth, we do try really hard, don't we, in our worship? Strobe lights, fog machines, enormous amps, great banks of bass-pounding speakers. But even the most high-tech stage can't really hold a candle to the 24 thrones circling the one lavish throne. All ringed then by heaven's brilliance, this amber flame and nimbus of emerald, rainbow. I mean, a whole entire embankment, whole wall of Bose speakers could not even get heard over that lightning crash and lightning flash, thunder crash, pulsating, booming from the throne. That's what's going on right now in the Lamb's space, God's space. That's what we are reflecting right here, right now as we worship. Did you get a glimpse through the door, that gate, that curtain, that gauzy veil? Can you see it? Can you see into heaven when we worship? And we're like, really? That's us? We get to participate in that? Here, now? Now, it's true. We're not a whole lot different from those 7 churches from just in the first scene, right? Those 7 messages that we looked at just the last time we were with Revelation. Like us, they were small, they were sometimes squabbling, they were poor. A few of them were rich, smug, complacent. Face it, I think we have to face it. Thyatira, Sardis, Smyrna, Laodicea, they're a lot like a typical cross-section of churches today. A church like Smyrna, poor, persecuted, oppressed, feels to me a bit like churches in parts of China, or in Zimbabwe, or Syria. And then in Thyatira, the sexual transgressions were scandalous. So we've got lots of that as well. Laodicea was full of self-sufficient backsliders who were drifting away from God, and we go, yikes, I kind of feel like we're like Laodicea. John, their pastor, had every right then to feel discouraged. He knows really well how faltering, how failing, how sinful, all the problems of these beleaguered 7 churches that he had been shepherding. But what can he do? He's been snatched away, right? He got taken away and he got put out on this pile of rocks in the middle of the Aegean, in the Mediterranean. How are they possibly going to survive without their shepherd, without their pastor? What's he doing? Is he anxiously fretting away about those 7 churches on that Sunday morning? Not a bit. He is what? Remember what he was doing? Yeah, he got a vision while he was meditating, while he was praying. He was worshiping. He was attentive, in the Spirit, it says, on that Sunday. And then apocalypse, which, if you haven't been here for the rest of the series, it's a good word. Apocalypse, the unveiling apocalypse of Jesus. Back in Laodicea, in Philadelphia, and Ephesus, his friends are all gathered together in little groups to worship. Right? They sing some hymns or choruses maybe, or they don't have this. But someone reads a scripture, someone speaks a word, preaches, someone shares a testimony. There are some prayer requests. Some pray. They give their tithe. The worshipers eat a little bread, drink a little wine. Maybe they have a bigger meal together. And then they go home, just like us. So where's the door into heaven? Last message. Remember the last one? Who was the last church? Second last, you're right. After Philadelphia came Laodicea, and right at the end, there's this verse that you probably memorized as a child. Where's the door? It says, behold again, or oh, look, I am standing, the trumpet voice of Jesus. I am standing where? At the door. And I am knocking. Good. Yes. Oh, I was wondering, why is Caitlin grinning? It's because she gave away the answer. If anyone hears my voice and opens the door, I will come in and eat with them, and they with me. Just open the door. But really, it's Jesus that opens the door for us. And the very next scene, an open door. Look, standing open. As we worship, the door opens up. I'm knocking, start worshiping. Jesus says to us, I'm waiting to come in. As we worship, a door opens up right through the curtain between the holy place right here and the Holy of Holies, which is just on the other side of the curtain. Right into heaven. Lavish. That's lavish. John, says Jesus, Alice, Caleb, Phoebe, come up here. My door stands wide open. Come. Just worship. So I really want to make sure we understand that all of this lavishness is not for after we die. Heaven is not for after this life here. It's for now. Come step into heaven now. Hear, worship, sing your heart out, cry, dance, laugh, worship. Be vulnerable as you come before God. And heaven gets very near. We get to see into heaven. But just in case you think that we should now go out and spend, $100,000 or something on lavish amps and fog machines and stage lights, that'd be nice. There's a second thing for us to see in this great heavenly scene of worship. So, true, lavish worship, the worship of heaven, is all about who? Yeah. But what, did you see Jesus here? That's usually the answer. We've got to wait half for the second part of this scene. Who is it all about? Yeah, the one on the throne, as someone pointed out. You caught on that this whole chapter is about the one on the throne at the very center of worship, God. Worship is not a concert then. When we start making worship all about the sounds and the lights and the awesome performance, we can be in danger of making ourselves the audience, making it all about us, putting on a show for us. But heaven's worship has an audience of one, God. The whole scene of chapter 4 utterly focuses on the one, on the throne at the very center of the universe. Everything revolves, everything circles around the one throne. Look at verse 2 here. John walks through the door into heaven, caught up in worship, and oh, a throne. First thing John sees. But just look at the rest of chapter 1. With the one seated Next one. On the throne. And 24 thrones, there are some other thrones here, but they circle the throne. Thunder crashes, lightning flashes from the throne. And again, before the throne, the torches before the throne, a sea. Everything focuses. Next one. Prowling around the throne, those four, I think creatures would be a better word. And then the song is all about the one on the throne. Holy, holy, holy is God. There's the one on the throne, our master, sovereign, strong. And then the last song, well, the one seated on the throne, the one seated on the throne, the throne. How many thrones was that in just one short chapter? And again, the song is to the one on the throne. Worthy, O Master, yes, our God. An audience of one. Far too often, our lavish worship puts something or someone else at the center. Too often, I think it's all about the big leader, not God. That's probably more of a problem in the big and popular churches. The focus all goes on the big leader at the center of that big movement. One of the original, perhaps the most famous of all the mega churches that started just shortly after I was born, would be Willow Creek in Chicago. Anybody hear of Willow Creek Church? It was like the big mega church, started by Bill Hybels. I looked up to Bill Hybels. He was an amazing preacher, and he used to, I thought, preach right from his heart. But we've just learned this year that for years he's been a sexual predator. He's been part of the whole Nicolaitans thing. It's a terrible blow to many, many pastors because there's a whole pastor training network that came out of Willow Creek. But I think it's even a warning to us here at Little Chinatown Peace Church. There's only one on the throne. Not Billy Graham, not Mark Driscoll, not Bill Hybels. I'm not going to name the big pastors from Vancouver. It's not even Tim Kuepfer. At the center, God and God alone. Chinatown Peace Church is not about the pastor. No church is. So, first, when we look at this worship in heaven, true worship, we see how lavish it is. Second, we see it's all about God, not about anybody else. Not about the leader, and not about how we even feel about the worship, our feelings or our emotions, though that should be caught up in this lavish worship. But thirdly, at this lavish worship of the one on the throne, third, is all about us. It's not at all about us, it is all about us. Again, maybe you're still wondering, where are all the dead people? Isn't that where they go, to heaven? If that worship is all about us, where's my dad? I'm sure he's in heaven. My grandparents. Don't worry, we'll get to them in chapter 6, but there'll be a few surprises there as well. But here we do see 24, remember who they were? 24 elders. Who are those 24 elders? 24. Symbol, not... Yeah, or statistic. Right? Numbers aren't statistics. They're not literal in the book of Revelation. And so what could 24 possibly be a symbol for? Well, how many tribes were there? 12. How many apostles? 12. So the 12 tribes representing the whole people of God in the first covenant. The 12 apostles representing the whole people of God in the new covenant. What do we have here? All of God's people gathered around the throne, at least represented there, with the 24 elders. They represent all of us. Who else, by the way, is worshiping there? Not just all of God's people, first and second covenant. Those living creatures prowling around the throne. What are they doing here? They're singing, they're worshiping. How many of them are there?
4.
Symbol, not statistic? 4 is the number 4, symbolizing 4 corners of the earth, the 4 winds. 4 directions, all that. It represents actually creation. It's a number of creation. We'll be spending more time with the numbers as we go on. Notice who they are. Lion, king of the beasts, the wild beasts, the ox, the most powerful of the domesticated animals. The eagle would be I suppose, the ruler of the air. I just read about the eagle in Australia that can actually carry off a kangaroo. That's one big eagle. Makes the bald eagle of the Americans look pretty puny, actually, next to it. Yeah, the scavenger bird from our American friends. But we have a beaver, so we shouldn't talk. We have a rodent. Yes. So, and of course, a human, the ruler of them all. Ruler over all of God's creature. It's God's, what are we called? God's special images that are meant to reflect the glory of God to the rest of creation, and then to gather up the praises of all the rest of creation, of the lions and the oxen and the eagles and all the rest of creation, and offer it back to God. We're these images. And so there's all of creation gathered around the throne. Still, remember from our retreat? Human beings are only one of God's creatures. It's so important for us to remember that. Remember Genesis 1? We don't even get our own day. That's right, good. We don't get our own day. We're created on the same day that Stanley's created. And the bugs and the bees, well, not the bees, the bugs and, I guess, the beetles. And Stanley. We all share the same day, in case we were getting a bit too cocky about our place in creation. All dogs go to heaven? What's the point here? If Earth's worship is meant to reflect or image heaven's worship, and we humans are meant to reflect or image God to the rest of creation, how is that important? How is that important? Heaven, we reflect heaven's worship, and we humans reflect creation's worship back up to God. How is that important? Well, it reminds us that matter matters, even in heaven. Far too many Christians think all that matters is heaven, going off to heaven when we die. Forget earth. You can exploit it. Exploit it now, escape it later. Quote Ann Coulter. She was great for a quote. God gave us the earth. We have dominion over the plants, the animals, the trees. God said, earth is yours. Take it, rape it. It's yours. Wait a minute. He and turned Ann Coulter off, because she's the most stark. But by the way, many Christians feel that way. It's ours. But what does the Bible say? The earth is the Lord's, and everything in it, the world and all who live in it. You can take that off. I don't really want to look at her any longer. Where did that crazy idea come from? When God's very first instruction, God's very first command to us in the whole Bible was, you are stewards, not owners. You are managers. I'm giving you the good creation to take care of it. You have this unique vocation. As soon as God creates humans in chapter 1, God says, I have a job for you to do, to shepherd, to rule over creation in the same way that I rule over you as a shepherd. Caring for creation, caring for God's garden. It's our first mandate to protect the rest of God's vulnerable creation. Where then did we come up with the strange notion that creation does not matter? That somehow we could worship on Sunday and do what we want the rest of the week. I even grew up singing a completely heretical song. This world is not my home, I'm just a passing through. Anybody else sing that song? Yeah, you older people know that one. Rubbish. That's rubbish. This world is our home. God created the earth as our home. We had this teaching as I grew up that we were created for heaven, not for the earth. Soon and very soon, Jesus would come down and suction us up to heaven, rapture us. And how did they explain that? This whole idea of rapture? Because it's not in the Bible. So they went to the first verse here of the text we just read, where Jesus says, John, scene 2 of the vision. Come on up and let me show you into heaven. And the one verse that the literalists should have taken literally, they took figuratively. This one. Now, I think when Jesus said, John, I want you to come up through heaven's door and see into heaven, that Jesus was saying, John, I want you to come in through heaven's door and see heaven. I think that's all he meant. Literally, he wanted John to have a view into heaven. But we grew up learning, being told that that verse actually means John is like figurative for the church. He's never ever figurative for the church anywhere else, but here he is. The one verse. Chapter 1, verse 1 of Revelation actually uses the word symbolize. Jesus is going to symbolize for us the meaning of creation. And most translations don't even put that word in symbol in verse 1 of chapter 1 because it's too controversial, because we should take the Bible literally. Yes, we should take the Bible literally when it wants us to take the Bible literally. But sometimes the Bible asks us to take it symbolically. And the very first verse of the book of Revelation says, take it symbolically, don't take it literally. The way we take Revelation seriously, that's what we should do, not literally, but seriously. The way we take Revelation seriously is by taking the first verse literally, which means taking the rest of Revelation as the symbols that it's intended. And we'll be looking at that a little more. So, Jesus is not going to come and suction us up to heaven, rapture us, whisk us away. God is not going to begin pulverizing, terrorizing, and finally incinerating what God has created. The earthquakes, the firebombs, the stars crashing out of the sky onto the earth, terror and tribulation as God absolutely wrecks his creation. No. That's all. Well, we'll talk about what that figuratively means in the rest of Revelation. God created this beautiful earth to be our home. And one day God's going to completely restore it. Look, why is everyone circling heaven's throne, singing, holy, holy, holy? Remember that final verse? Why is God being praised? Because you have created all things. The whole reason for chapter 4 is the Creator has created. He's worthy because he's created. Not because he's going to destroy creation, but because he made it in the first place. Notice what heaven is full of. Remember what we read through there? All the stuff of creation. Nothing in chapter 4 that we don't have on earth. Did you notice that? Nothing otherworldly, nothing unearthly, nothing super spiritual in heaven. It's all reflection of earth, of creation. There's a sea of crystal. There's crowns, there's thrones, there's elders, there's animals. A reflection of earth in heaven. God's space reflecting creation. God's good creation. God's not going to destroy it. God's going to redeem and restore it. May your kingdom come on earth as it is in heaven. That's how we worship. Okay, before I wrap this up by asking, what does this scene 2, part 1 of scene 2 of the whole vision of Revelation mean now for us? I promised I would give some time for Q&A. So any reflections, any thoughts on this chapter 4 or what you just heard? Lavish worship of the one God, all about God, but then it includes all of us. Rose.
So you mentioned worship. It seems that it's all we do is worship in heaven. So what's worship? Will you explain that later on?
Wonderful. You're just setting me up for the conclusion here. But what comes to mind right now is Romans 12. Let your whole lives be an act of living worship. Get your lives on the altar. So worship is definitely this. We are right to come together and pray and read the Bible. We're called to worship. There's a reason this happens on a Sunday morning in basically a worship of one, John on the island of Patmos in the Mediterranean on that pile of rocks. But then it flows into the whole rest of the week. So yes, to all creation, Right? All creation worships. So a good question. I'll come back to that a bit.
So you're saying that he's going to restore the earth in the future, so thereby bringing heaven really down.
Yes. That's the end. That's the final scene, chapters 21 and 22 of Revelation. It's rapture in reverse. Right? Not us getting suctioned up to heaven, but heaven coming down and the curtain getting completely, not just torn apart, but discarded. And we act like Jesus. We get the same bodies as Jesus, resurrection bodies, and we're able to exist in God's dimension and our dimension. We will know the fourth dimension or the fifth and sixth, however many dimensions there are in the new creation.
And also the chapter 4 is kind of a response to the 7 letters.
Yeah.
I mentioned earlier to the 7 churches that whatever God promises is actually revealed in heaven.
Good.
So if you tie to some of the promises from the 7 letters, and then you will see this is kind of a fulfillment
Wonderful.
when the days come.
Right, I just showed one, right? Where Jesus said, I'm standing at the door and knocking. Start worshiping, start praying, and I'll open up the door to heaven. Right? Revelation 3 verse 20 links us right to Revelation 3:20 to 4 verse 1. But you're right, all the other promises. But as Iris pointed out, they show up in chapter 4. But if you go back then to the final scene, 21 and 22, all of the promises in the 7 letters all come back again at the end. It's actually this wonderful inclusio, we call it. So the book of Revelation is tied together. The promises for the 7 churches are given in the new creation, which starts now. Yeah, good.
So also the question I think would be to continue from where Alex left off. So if God is one day going to, in the future, recreate, right, then what is so wrong about ripping it right now? You know,
Yes. Yes.
Seriously.
Yes.
And on top of it, what do I have to do, really?
Yes.
If he's going to recreate it, who am I to do anything about it?
That's a wonderful question. And the best answer, I think, comes from Paul in 1 Corinthians 15, which is all about resurrection and new creation, in which he promises it's coming. And the very last verse, 1 Corinthians 15, verse 58, says, Therefore, brothers and sisters, stand firm. Let nothing move you. Always give yourselves now fully to the work of the Lord, because you know that your labor in the Lord will never be in vain. Now, he's put that right at the end of this new creation passage. What Paul is saying is that anything we do now, God somehow picks up and includes in the new creation. So my gardening today, my helping with the opioid crisis here in the downtown east side, anything that I participate in to work toward God's new creation, God doesn't forget it. In fact, what we do today matters. Our worship somehow gets included in heaven's worship. And that's exciting. That means anything that you do tomorrow, the next day, that's kingdom work, that's part of new creation work, it's going to end up in eternity. You're going to see that it carries on. God somehow combines it together in the same way God takes the city of man, the New Jerusalem, with the Garden of Eden and sticks them together in Revelation 21:22. Our human efforts, city, God's Garden of Eden, you see both together in new creation in Revelation 21:22. That's exciting. Nothing you do, Paul says, will be eternally in vain. It'll carry forward. 1,000,000 years from now, we'll be talking about what you did this week.
Hopefully not the bad ones.
In the Lord. Whatever you do in the Lord, Paul says. So you're right. That gets burned away. Earlier in 1 Corinthians, he says some of it just ends up wood, hay, and stubble and burns, disappears. So you're right. That won't. Great. Okay. We could go on for a long time here, but it is time to wrap this up. How then do we respond? I think we've basically talked about it already. If our worship is a reflection of heaven's worship, and if you and I are reflections, images of God, then it's all about on earth as in heaven. Let your will be done on earth as already in heaven.
One more question.
Go ahead.
How do we know when the Bible wants us to take things literally or symbolically?
Oh, that's a big question. You're not allowed to ask such big questions. When the Bible tells us to take things symbolically, we better take them symbolically.
But how? Like the number 24, the 4,
Right.
It doesn't say these are symbolic.
No, but all the numbers throughout apocalyptic literature are symbols. And when it goes 7, 7, 7, 7, 28, 4, 12, and you get all those combinations of those, it sounds like this is more than statistics. We don't have a 1,437. Maybe that number should be taken as a statistic, but there's none of those in Revelation.
So the 6 days of creation?
I think that's a symbol too. I really do think the 7 days of creation are symbols for how God created, and that chapter 1 is not meant to be a science text for us. I really believe that. I think that for us to take Genesis 1 and kind of impose our Enlightenment scientific mindset on it is just due to Genesis 1 what God, Moses, and the writers never intended to do with it. But that's a long and big discussion.
So next study will be Genesis.
Genesis. Okay. I know that has been, by the way, that's a dangerous thing to say in some churches because some churches see a 6-day young earth creation as a point of orthodoxy. If you don't believe in a young earth, if you follow what all the science, what the book of science, what the book of creation says, when you go out there and look at the rocks, if you follow that rather than the scripture, heresy. I don't think so. Because even Calvin, long before Darwin, and even Jewish philosophers, I think it was Maimonides, talked about how creation was far, far longer ago than we could ever imagine. So if pre-scientific people could say that, I don't know why we can't. Okay. Good questions. But symbols, the Bible, Revelation especially says, take this symbolically in verse 1 of chapter 1. I think we should.
Sorry, you said that. I was looking
You're going to have to look at it in the King James Version, the New American Standard Bible, in a version that's very literal. Because it's controversial. Because there's so many people who want to take Revelation literally sometimes. Nobody takes Revelation literally all the time. Nobody believes that there's a woman standing on the moon clothed in the sun with a ring of stars around her head. Nobody says that's a literal woman somewhere up in outer space. Listen, can I... Caleb, yes. Okay, we have time. Go ahead.
So, like, if that should be taken literally, then should the vision that the Bible gives of heaven should be taken literally?
Are you saying if what should be taken literally? Go ahead.
If that, like, woman on the moon or whatever shouldn't be taken literally.
Should not?
Shouldn't be taken literally. Then
is heaven really literal? And so I believe there are real angelic beings. Now, I'm not sure I'm ever going to see a real literal lion covered in eyes, and winged.
6 wings.
6 wings? Or an ox. I think that those are images saying something. So heaven is coming to earth. I think we have to be very careful about trying to give the furniture of heaven and exactly what it's going to look like in there. So I'm not looking to Revelation 4 to give me a kind of a blueprint of the furniture of heaven. It's going to be great. Better, I cannot imagine. Ear has not heard, eye has not seen what God has revealed for us. That's as much as I want to say. It's going to be better than you and I can ever imagine.
But, like, not just, like, the creatures and whatnot, but, like, how do we know that's, like, heaven's not just something...
Heaven itself. So, okay. How do we know that this here conversation we're having right now is even real, right? That's a philosophical question you're asking. Right? What is this? Inception? Oh, the Matrix, right? I believe God has created that. I believe the Bible says God is creator, so I believe earth and heaven. In the beginning, God created our space and God's space. Heaven and earth. For me, it starts with that very first sentence in the Bible. Okay. Thank you. Great question, Caleb. We'll have more time to talk about this, but can I just say this? There's a reason that creation is covered in eyes, those four creatures. Because we're meant to see. This vision is meant to open up our eyes. But we can only do that if we worship. Heaven's worship is not just what we do right here in this room, of course. It's planting gardens. It's working to make the downtown east side a safer, healthier, happier community. It's picking up our garbage. It's not filling up the oceans with plastic. It's helping out our friend who has an addiction. It's what you're going to do. It's working really hard and studying your hardest at school tomorrow for whatever the vocation God has called you to. That's worship. Open up your eyes. The whole book of Revelation, this whole vision is so that we start opening our eyes. Eyes inside and out. See the world as God sees it. Things are not just as they appear. Let Jesus open your eyes. Let's pray together.